Carol Romano, welcome. It's good
Hi,
to see
Carol again.
I know, it's great to have like regular names that we see. Alberto Lenz, is that your sister, Alberto?
It's my sister.
Bienvenido. And if you guys, as you're entering, if you want to put in the chat box where you're joining us from, it's always fun to see where people are joining us from. I welcome. I'm Rebecca Eichler, and I'm here in drizzly San Miguel de Allende. Judy, did you get any rain where you were? It seems to be such a disappointing rainy season. Haven't had any of those nice big downpours. Chicago, excellent. Welcome, Robert. And Ginger is joining us from where in California?
From Merced, California.
Yeah.
Central
Nice.
Valley.
Excellent. And Alberto, you're here in San Miguel, right?
I'm in San Miguel. This is my studio where I'm here in my studio.
Excellent. Let's see, Mindy in Cabo. Oh, nice. And North Carolina, and it's pouring. You know, I think when it rains in North Carolina and in Virginia, where I used to live, it was always so nice in the summer because it meant it was going to cool down as opposed to that oppressive heat we'd always have. So let's see, we have 15 people on. Should we give people a few more minutes to keep logging in?
Yeah, if we want to go through the introduction, maybe.
Okay. So welcome everybody to our third of 3 presentations with Alberto Lenz. Before he gets started, I wanted to tell you about our upcoming program that we have. Super excited for our lineup. The first one, the next one that's coming up is from a San Miguel favorite, Albert Coffey, who will be talking about the origins of the Aztecs. He promises that he will tell us a story that most people have not heard. And I'm curious, it's piqued my interest for sure. That will be July 30th and August 6th, same time, 5 o'clock to 6:30. And he's going to be telling us a historical tale of the origins of the Aztecs.
Also, those of you that attended the previous webinar with Albert Coffey, this is different. So I think there's some questions about that, and it is a different webinar than the other one.
Right, exactly. After Albert's webinars, we're really excited to welcome Chef Les Carmona, who is going to talk about La MILPA MESOAMERICANA, the 3 sisters and the 7 warriors, the Holy Trinity, the process of how the indigenous people of Mexico grew their crops in such a way that influenced plant husbandry throughout the world and from the ancient times to now. And he's an accomplished chef and pastry chef who lives here in San Miguel now, and he runs, when times are normal, he runs San Miguel food tours. But now that we're all stuck at home, we can learn about the food, and then when we can travel again, we welcome you back to San Miguel and go on one of his food tours. That will be on Thursday, August 13th, again, from 5 p.m. to 6:30, and you can register for that on our website. And the last one that we have scheduled now is we're welcoming back Alberto. We had feedback, people were very interested in the women that he talked about, the women artists on the front lines of the revolution. And he's going to tell us about how these groundbreaking women demanded a change in their social roles after the revolution. And he'll focus specifically on NAHUI OLIN, who was one of the key figures of change in the revolution, or rather in the artistic revolution, and through her activism and creativity, how she shaped the world, or the new world that emerged post-revolution. That will be a 1-day seminar on Tuesday, August 18th. And that one, again, you can register for all 3 of these webinars on our website, languageadventurepros.com. You can view past webinars. We have everything that we've posted, that we've had. We have those on our website, and you can register for past ones and sign up for future webinars, as well as make your donations for the speakers. So with that, we hope that you'll consider joining us. We're very excited about this. We also we're working on some different ones. A Mojiganguero, that's one of the artists who make the mojigangas. And for those of you who have been to San Miguel, you'll know the giant paper mache puppets that accompany a lot of the festivals. We have an interview with one of them and a virtual tour of his workshop. And we also have Bill Levasseur of the Mask Museum, who's going to be going more in depth about some of the masks and the dances that he touched upon in one of his first webinars with us. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ginger to introduce Alberto.
Thank you, Rebecca. We're welcoming back Alberto. We're so happy to have this fabulous San Miguel local sculptor, painter, architect. You can see behind him a little bit some of his work, beautiful work, born in Mexico City. So he's exhibited in more than 20 solo shows and 40 group shows all over the world: Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, San Miguel Allende, New York, Miami, Toronto, and Barcelona. And he participated in the Bienal de Monterrey. It's one of those celebrated exhibitions of contemporary art in Mexico. And his work is included in public and private collections in Mexico, the United States, Spain, and Venezuela. And in the last few years, he's been engaged in public sculpture, drawing, and some really fabulous jewelry design as well. So we welcome back Alberto Lenz. Thank you, Alberto.
Gracias. Thank you very much. Gracias, Ginger. Gracias, Rebecca. Welcome everyone to this of our webinar about Mexican muralism, revolution on the walls. Today we're going to talk about what I call the consolidation of the mural painted movement, a period that goes more or less from 1923 to 1935. And we're going to see the major works of this first period. This is a first initial period, but it's a very important initial period because we have major works. One of them is still in the National Preparatory School that we saw in the second session, but the others are in the Ministry of Education in the National Palace in Mexico City. So these are really major works that really consolidate the movement, and let's start about it. Okay. Well, after the first murals carried out at the National Preparatory School, the mural painting movement, can you raise me from the gracias? The mural painting movement took a dramatic leap towards an openly political style, with themes linked to the struggle of the working classes against social inequality. Of course, they were very much linked to the Communist Party. And all this period is about, Marxism and the view of the left about what was happening in Mexico after the revolution. This is an interesting and important work by Orozco. It's called Trinity. It was painted in 1926 and is in the National Preparatory School. Well, several factors motivated this dramatic evolution. On the one hand, the resurgence of strong tensions and political conflicts, such as the frustrated but bloody rebellion of Adolfo de la Huerta against the Álvaro Obregón government in 1923. Another factor was the radicalization of the left-wing groups and the growing influence in Mexico of the Russian Revolution. A third factor was the foundation of the Mexican Communist Party and the incorporation into the party of most of the artists of the mural movement. Here we see Diego Rivera in a march of the Communist Party. Formed at the end of 1922, the Syndicate of Technical Workers, Painters and Sculptors, that was the name, Syndicate of Technical Workers, Painters and Sculptors, was the organized expression of the increasing ideological radicalism of the artists involved in the mural painting movement. Here we have a photo with most of them. We have Siqueiros, we have Orozco, we have John Charlotte, we have Rivera, etc. So this is a photo of them in front of one of the murals. And as you see, now there's an important group of women also participating with them. The syndicate became the vehicle for the manifesto, another one. We already have the one from Atl, a second one from Siqueiros written in Barcelona, and this is the third one, written in 1923, also by Siqueiros, and published in 1924, signed by the majority of the mural painters. In this manifesto, the artists involved in the syndicate outlined their artistic principles and goals. I'm going to read them, the most important, because they're very interesting. First one, our fundamental goal must be to socialize artistic expression and wipe out individualism. Second, we repudiate easel painting because it is aristocratic, and we praise monumental art because it is public property. Third, we proclaim at this time of social change that art must no longer be the expression of individual satisfaction, which it is today, but should aim to become a fighting educative art for all. And fourth, the highest, most logical, purest, and most powerful type of painting is mural painting, because it is for the people, and it cannot be converted into an object for personal gain. So these were the main points of the main arguments of this important manifesto. More than a labor union, the syndicate was a collective platform to promote aesthetic proposals, open public debate, and establish a position on the country's political scene. For this purpose, the syndicate published El Machete, a newspaper edited by Siqueiros and Javier Carrera. Here we have two numbers of this important newspaper, El Machete. It later was transformed into the newspaper of the Communist Party. Aimed at the public of rural and urban workers, El Machete was a very visual newspaper featuring engravings and cartoons made by the muralists. This is, by the way, this is a photo taken by Tina Modotti, very famous photo. And here we have a cartoon by Orozco published in El Machete. The syndicate was also the social platform that fostered the coexistence of mural painters with other intellectuals and artists, Mexican and foreigners, with whom they met in cantinas, pulquerias, fondas, restaurants, and in the famous parties organized at their house by Germán and Lola Cueto, as in this photo taken in 1923. In this photo, a costume party, we can see NAHUI OLIN in the corner to the left, and Tina Modotti is lying right in the center below, in front of these people with the costumes. Edward Weston, the famous photographer, is to the right, almost at the border to the left, to the right. So these were the kind of parties they organized. It was like a bohemia group that gathered together with not only painters, but also writers, photographers, sculptors, musicians. So it was a whole artistic scene existing together. Well, with the creation of the syndicate, the artists sought to assume themselves as workers of culture. They didn't consider themselves as artists or geniuses. They considered themselves as workers of culture. And in this sense, they tried to create links with the unions of workers that emerged from the revolution. Of the three great muralists, Orozco was the first one who adopted mural painting as a means of carrying out social criticism in terms of what was happening in Mexico and the elite and the poor people. This is a mural that we're going to see a little bit later. It's called The Aristocrats, and it's in the National Preparatory School. This is another cartoon by Orozco. Orozco was a great cartoonist, and he was influenced by Posada. And in his cartoons, he exercised a very profound criticism of what was of the vision of the elite and the rich people and the poor people. So this is The Aristocrats, painted in 1923 in the National Preparatory School. After Maternity, his first mural, Orozco turned to his cartoonish style to paint this kind of powerful murals that will project him as one of the great exponents of Mexican muralism. Here, the theme of Spanish conquerors versus Indians is transformed into a more modern version, that of los de arriba versus los de abajo, those above versus those below. Beneath the feet of the wealthy people above, in a corner, almost invisible in the darkness, we can see a woman lying on her back, one hand upturned in a begging posture, the other hand holding a skeletal baby. On another nearby wall, Orozco painted the mural Law and Justice, 1923, in which he presented a sharp message about the falsehood of these two concepts in modern society. In this mural, the figures of a man representing law and a woman representing justice dance embrace in an evident state of drunkenness. As we can see, law, the man, winks at justice, representing the trap, the dark arrangement, while justice, with the bandage wrongly placed, has a bloody hand printed on her clothes. For me, I think that the masterpiece in this cartoonish style adopted by Orozco in these murals is A Rich Banquet While the Workers Fight. This mural was also painted in 1923. Something interesting is that all these murals raise a strong criticism from conservative groups and even from important intellectuals. For example, D.H. Lawrence said of them, they were ugly and vulgar, strident caricatures, as violent as possible. And Salvador Novo, a very important Mexican poet, described them as repulsive pictures. Painted some years later, in 1926, The Trench is perhaps Orozco's most famous masterwork in the National Preparatory School. It was painted in the ground floor of the central patio, very close to Maternity. In this very powerful image, three soldiers are frozen in motion as they fall to their deaths, their nearly fixed bodies forming a crucifixion. The trench is at once tragic and heroic. For many scholars, it is the first modern mural to deal directly with the dark, bloody side of the revolution, which left at least 1 million dead. Also in 1926, Orozco adopted a muted palette and a greater angularity in the construction of his figures. This new aesthetic can be seen in Cortés and Malinche, a mural he painted near a stairway on the ground floor. Malinche was a young 16th century indigenous slave who acted as an interpreter for the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés and later bore his son. A polarizing figure in Mexican culture, in Mexican history, some consider her to be the symbolic mother of the mestizo. Others view her as a traitor to the indigenous people of Mexico. Orozco mural plays with both views and adds another, I think very important, alternative, that of a woman who was forced into submission. Around Cortés and Malinche, Orozco painted a series of smaller murals dealing with the Spanish conquerors and the Catholic priests that came with them, creating in this way a large pictorial ensemble dedicated to the Spanish conquest. Now, in 1923, José Vasconcelos, the Secretary of Education, gave the muralists a second important space. The new building that you can see in this photo of the Ministry of Public Education, recently built in the center of Mexico City, very close to the National Preparatory School. The Ministry of Public Education had been created in 1921 by President Álvaro Obregón, and the new building, commissioned to architect Federico Méndez, was one of the first major public works of the new government. In the words of José Vasconcelos, the first Secretary of Education, the mission of the new institution, and listen very carefully, this is very interesting, the mission of the new institution was to save the children, educate the young, redeem the Indians, enlighten everyone, and spread a culture of exaltation, no longer of a caste, but of all men. With this mission in mind, Vasconcelos commissioned Diego Rivera the decoration of the walls on the 3 levels of the building. The Ministry of Public Education will become the site of Rivera's first great achievement as a mural painter, with 220 verified frescoes made between 1923 and 1928, consolidating his position as a leader of the movement. Following the plan of the building, Rivera organized his murals in 2 large groups, the Courtyard of Labor and the Courtyard of Las Fiestas. Here we see both courtyards or patios, one in front of the other, just entering from the main entrance. First we have the Courtyard of Labor, and then afterwards we have the Courtyard of Las Fiestas. In the Courtyard of Labor, Rivera painted images dealing with the main economic activities of the different regions of Mexico. In this first set of murals, 2 masterpieces, the sugar mill to the left and entry to the mine to the right, both of 1923, stand out. And as we can see, the monumentality of the images is clearly influenced by the murals of the Italian Renaissance. In the second culture, that is the culture of Las Fiestas, the idea that the nation's culture was both the greatest achievement and the greatest possession of ordinary people of El Pueblo became central part of Rivera's artistic proposal. Here we can see the corn harvest to the left and the corn festival to the right, both from 1924. I think that one of the greatest murals in this courtyard is the burning of the Judases, 1924. The traditional Mexican feast of Holy Week, in which cardboard figures representing the devils that the people hate are burned. In these cases, the devils, as you can see, are the rich man, the soldier, and the priest. Another important and beautiful mural is Day of the Dead, in which Rivera introduces his well-known use of a multitude of characters, many of them real people, completely filling the space. Among the crowd, Rivera paints himself wearing a hat and with an elegant woman by his side, perhaps his wife at that time, Lupe. NAHUI OLIN, the blonde girl, a woman in front of him, stands there looking to the left. Now Rivera dedicated the last floor of the Patio de las Fiestas, the courtyard of Las Fiestas, to make a set of 26 murals called El Corrido de la Revolución, the Ballad of Revolution. The common theme of these murals is to praise the revolution, but especially the revolution of the future, which will mark the liberation of the proletariat from class oppression. In these murals, there is a strong criticism of the opponents of the revolution, as we can see in the Wall Street banquet from 1928. In this mural, Rivera painted a group of American industrialists. Among them, we can see John D. Rockefeller and Henry Ford, seated at a dinner table, examining the gold ticker tape of the stock exchange. Another example of these murals is the Night of the Rich, also from 1928, where wealthy businessmen and corrupt politicians are partying with prostitutes, while behind them, a group of soldiers and workers, one with a red shirt and a Russian-type profile, are taking up arms and preparing to enter the scene. The masterpiece of this set of murals is called Distribution of the Arms, where the artist pays tribute to the two revolutions of the 20th century, the Mexican and the Russian, which appear as the foundations of the path to the future, pointed out by the soldier worker who appears at the top, carrying the communist flag. In this mural, as we can see, Frida Kahlo occupies the center of the entire composition, standing out in her red shirt. Indeed, this was a great tribute to a very young woman whom Rivera had met just a year earlier. Frida Kahlo met Diego Rivera in 1927, when she came to where he was working on the murals of the Secretary of Ministry of Public Education. She was 20 years old and he was 40, and they were married 2 years later. This is an interesting photo of Frida and Diego talking in front of a mural in progress. As we know, Frida and Diego form a famous couple of artists and political activists who enriched the legend of Mexican muralism in the world. And now recently transformed into a symbol of feminism, Frida is perhaps even more famous than Diego. I will end this session on the consolidation of the mural movement with the imposing mural that Diego Rivera painted in the National Palace between 1929 and 1935. This monumental mural is called The History of Mexico and was painted in 3 adjoining walls in the National Palace overlooking the building's main staircase. This is a very dramatic view of the murals and the staircase. You can see the size of it. It was a huge mural to paint. It's not my favorite. I think it's a little bit official in terms of what the government was expecting. I prefer other works of Rivera. I was talking about this before the presentation with Rebecca and Ginger, but still, of course, it's a very important work and it's right in the middle of the National Palace. The central wall displays the period from the Spanish conquest up to the Mexican Revolution. And this is interesting. Rivera put both events in the same wall. And by doing this, by joining in the same image both events, the conquest and the revolution, Rivera creates the first mural in which the revolution is seen from an historical perspective. So he's given the revolution a place in history. Something that I find very interesting is to see the clear reference of the mural to the murals of the Italian Renaissance. Particularly, you can see this in the battle painted at the bottom of the mural. Here you have the reference to this famous mural by Paolo Uccello painted in 1440, the Battle of San Romano. You can see the reference, the influence is very direct. In a deeply Catholic country, Rivera did not hesitate to criticize the role of the Catholic Church in the conquest of Mexico. Here we have a scene of the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. Now on the left wall, Rivera painted a panorama of modern day Mexico as he saw it. Located in the central space of National Palace, symbol of the greatest political power in Mexico, we can see Karl Marx appearing above the entire composition, showing the way to the future. I wish to end this presentation, but telling you that while Rivera was painting this huge monumental mural in the National Palace, a very young Rufino Tamayo, the 4th great muralist, was painting the first mural of his life in a very modest colonial building where the National School of Music was located. This is the Song and the Music, El Canto y la Música, painted in 1933, the same year in which Rivera was finishing the mural in the National Palace. The Song and the Music was the first and the only 3 murals that Tamayo painted on fresco, using the fresco technique directly on a wall. His later murals will be work as large paintings on canvas mounted on racks, independent of the walls. But for me, the most important aspect of this mural is that it marks Tamayo's departure from the highly politicized mainstream of Mexican muralism. Tamayo didn't agree to make murals a vehicle for communist propaganda. He didn't want to talk about the struggle of the working class. He wanted to talk about Mexico and the richness of his culture and the color and the traditions, etc. So in this way, Tamayo inaugurated an alternative and very important correct within muralism, as focus, as I said, more on the traditions, the culture, the color and arts of Mexico. By the way, this is a very hidden mural. It's like a treasure. It has been restored recently, and you can see it in the place where there was usually before was the National School of Music. Now it's a museum dedicated to show the mural. So this is like a hidden treasure of Mexico City. If you can go there, please go and visit it. Well, in these 3 sessions of this webinar, we outlined the first years of the mural painted movement in Mexico, focusing, of course, on the work of the 3 big masters, Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros. But I want to say, and this is very important, that Mexican muralism was a collective movement in which many talented artists participated, first as students and assistants, and then as masters in their own right. Artists such as Javier Guerrero, to the left, and Jean Charlotte. Also, Maria Izquierdo and Carlos Mérida. Roberto Montenegro and Rina Lasso. Two very important masters, Juan O'Gorman, who was also an architect, the architect that introduced functionalism architecture in Mexico, and Rufino Tamayo, that, as we know, was considered later the 4th great muralist. All these artists contributed to the artistic movement of great energy and world significance, which will reach very high levels. Here we have Man of Fire, 1939, painted by Orozco in the Cabañas Cultural Institute, also called Hospicio Cabañas, in the city of Guadalajara. This is a very important mural by Siqueiros, University for the People. This is at the National University, UNAM, the new campus of UNAM in Mexico City. This was built around the 1950, 1960, and is a real important campus. Now it's a World Heritage site, and you should go to UNAM to see all this, not only the murals, but also the architecture. Is a great accomplishment of Mexican culture in the middle of the 20th century. This is the murals done by Juan O'Gorman in the Central Library of the UNAM. Now this mural is called Social Security by Carlos Mérida. Carlos Mérida developed a completely personal style, very geometric, very interesting. I was at the beginning of my career as a painter and sculptor. I was very much influenced by Carlos Mérida. This is one of the most famous murals by Rufino Tamayo, Mexico Today, 1953. You can see it in Bellas Artes, in the Palacio de Bellas Artes. This one is called Water Source of Life by Diego Rivera. And this is in the Chapultepec Park in Mexico City. And finally, I want to end this presentation with the imposing March of Humanity by Siqueiros, 1971, which is located in the Poliforum Cultural Siqueiros, also in Mexico City. So thank you for your participation. As you know, as you see, muralism is a very, very complex artistic movement, is a big accomplishment of Mexican culture, and there's a lot to say in our next session. As Ginger and Rebecca told you, we're going to focus a little bit on the women that were participating in this. We're going to start talking about NAHUI OLIN, and then I think we are going also to talk in another session about Tina Modotti, which was a very, very important photographer in the 20th century. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Alberto. We have a couple of questions. Alberto Lenz says, it amazes me that there are so many murals painted by different artists in the National Preparatory Building. How did this happen and why?
Why did it happen? Because Vasconcelos gave the whole building to them. He gave them complete freedom to do whatever they wanted with the building. They was very audacious from Vasconcelos, but he wanted to fill the building with murals. So he invited a lot of people. Most of them ignore. A lot of painters, most of them ignore, and each one took their space. Each one selected their own space and started to paint, and there was no restriction. They could paint whatever they wanted.
Wow. That actually makes me think of a question, is whether any of the artists suffered any backlash from the scathing social commentary that was part of their murals.
Excuse me, can you repeat it?
Did they have any backlash? Did people complain or,
Yes, this is interesting. This is very interesting. As I said in the presentation, the people were angry with this. Of course, the most conservative groups were very angry, but also the students that weren't there, and the public in general, and even intellectuals as D.H. Lawrence and Salvador Novo and some others that didn't like it. In fact, it is part of the legend, I don't know how true is this, is that the painters had to go to work with a gun to defend themselves from the aggression of the public. So this was not accepted very easily. And this is something interesting, how art can really move our spirits, no, for good or for bad.
Right. So speaking of that, did the muralism change the way of thinking about India?
No, sorry. We're almost the same 100 years later. You know, something is art, and then real life is another thing. And it was, well, of course, they were pointing out important ideas and important themes, but Mexican society is very racist and very classist, and it has taken a long time to get rid of that, and we still don't do it. We're still racist and still classist, and we still look. And this is, I showed you the words of Vasconcelos, who was an enlightened man. He was a talented, he was a cultivated man, saying that his aim was to redeem the Indians. No? What was that meaning? No? What redeem the Indians? Who are you to do that? No? But this was the point of view of a white middle class Mexican. No?
Not much different in other countries these days, is it?
No, these are issues that are hard to overcome in any society, But of course, Mexico has a profound history of racism that comes from the colonia. and the conquest and all that. And we're still managing that now.
So we have a question from Mindy Lipschutz. Is it possible to briefly discuss the story of how the murals of Diego Rivera and David Siqueiros came to be painted in the Bellas Artes in San Miguel? And probably a very good person to answer that, because some people may not know that you were the former director of the Centro Nigromante here in San Miguel. So
I was a former director of Bellas Artes. I don't know if there's a Diego Rivera mural there. I think no. There's a Siqueiros, and then some people, there are disciples that were students from Siqueiros, like Martinez and other people. I don't know about any Diego Rivera there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. There's a Diego Rivera in Bellas Artes, at least in the building. I never saw one. But the Siqueiros mural happens because when the School of Bellas Artes was established here in San Miguel, they invited Siqueiros to give a workshop about muralism. And he came and gave his workshop. And then he had a terrific fight with the owner of the school and also with the society. The society was very conservative at that time, maybe still is, and they didn't accept that Siqueiros. Siqueiros was always he has always been a political activist, so he didn't they didn't want to have a communist, so openly communist in San Miguel. So Siqueiros was in big trouble with the owner and with the society. So he moved away and he left the mural unfinished. It was an experiment. It was a task. They do it in the workshop of muralism in Bellas Artes. The idea was like an experiment of the whole workshop to paint that area in Bellas Artes, and it is in the finish because Siqueiros left.
it's a beautiful, it's stunning, I think, as it is.
Yes.
Anybody do you know if Bellas Artes is open these days? Are people able to visit?
No, I don't know. I don't know if it's open with all this pandemic. I don't know if they are open. I think not. I think all the federal government is closed.
But once things do open, I definitely encourage people to go in and check it out. It's stunning. It's huge and it's beautiful.
And there are very fine murals by other people, by Martinez, for example. I love the Martinez murals. They're splendid, no? So, you know, what I was trying to say, even though we focus on the three big masters and some famous names, the muralism was a huge collective movement. There were many people involved in that. And not only in Mexico City, of course, in many other places in the country. For example, I was very close friend to Jose Chavez Morado, who was a very famous muralist here in Guanajuato. He did he created many murals in the city of Guanajuato, and you can see them in Guanajuato. So this was not only in Mexico City, and it was not only this group of people. There were much more people, and it's a huge history to show in three classes, no?
Thank you. We have another question from Mara Colechia. She said, this is a great presentation. At the time that you're talking about, was the muralist movement actually patronized by the national government? And what repercussion did the government's financial support, if any, have on the artistic world in Mexico in general?
Yes, this first period of the mural movement was sponsored by the Mexican government. Why? Because as you saw in the presentation, they were criticizing the enemies of revolution, the rich ones, the American industrialists, the elite, the bankers, all that, no? So there were the enemies of the government in this first period of the revolutionary government were the same enemies that the Communist Party and the muralists have. So there was a coincidence of ideas. Later on, the government went more to the right, became more left, less left and more right, and this started to change. But the muralists were already consolidated, and they had done already their work. So most of these famous murals were done when there's still certain support, at least moral support of the government, or at least they didn't interfere with them. I studied in the National University a master's degree, and I have friends that came from many places in South America, from Argentina and Brazil and Chile, and it was a time of the dictatorships in Latin America, in Argentina and Brazil, and that. And all of them were in the exile, studying here, but in the exile, they have to leave their countries, and they were surprised that here in Mexico we could read anything and nobody bothered about that. Because if you read something from Marx in Argentina, they will kill you. Here you could go to any library and you can find all the books of Marx and buy it and read it and nobody bothers you. So that's why that Mexico was. You can read and say anything and nobody bothers you. But as a friend said, nobody makes any case about that. Nobody cares, you know?
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Carol Romano, who asks, did the communist movement remain solid among the muralists through the decades, or did competitiveness appear as certain muralists were given the building spaces to create their work and others were not? So in other words, how did their personal relationships evolve?
It was different in every case. Siqueiros was always a political activist. He was always a very strong communist. He participated even in the killing of Trotsky. You know, that Trotsky was living here and he was killed by Stalin. And they say Siqueiros was part of the intellectual authors of that. And so he was always in the political scenario, and he suffered prison and he had to go to the exile and whatever. So it depends on the case. Rivera was more in the mood of making good relations with the government and with the rich people. So he painted a lot when he was famous around the world. He painted a lot of murals and a lot of paintings of portraits of rich people. You know, he even went to New York to paint a mural for Rockefeller. The same guy he was criticizing in the Ministry of Education. Well, not the same, I guess. The son of the guy that appears in the mural, but he went to work for the Rockefellers after painting them in this mural, the Night of the Rich, no, something like that. So, you know, Rivera was more in the mood of going along with the times, no? Siqueiros not, Orozco no. And then people like Tamayo and people like Merida and people like Juan O'Gorman were more focusing in the art than in the political content of the art, no? So they were more focused in doing beautiful things, introducing functionalism, introducing the avant-garde in Europe and the States, etc. No?
Thank you. On the topic of Diego Rivera and the mural that he did for the Rockefellers, Rosemary Glenn asks, can you talk a little bit more about the works of the Mexican muralists done outside of Mexico?
Well, yes, it's another story. The first one to open the way to outside Mexico, specifically to the United States, was Siqueiros. Siqueiros went because he was running from the political scenario. He went to exile in Los Angeles, and he painted there a mural that's called America Tropical, which was not a very, very polite mural. It was a mural done in the Spanish barrio in Los Angeles. I don't remember now the name of the neighborhood, but you know it's where the Spanish people lived for centuries there. And he painted this mural that now it has been restored, but it's a mural called America Tropical, where he's criticizing American imperialism. So he paints an American eagle above a Mayan Indian who is crucified. So the Indian is crucified and the eagle is above his head. So this was not a very polite mural to paint in the States, but well, it was painted for the Mexican community in Los Angeles. And then Siqueiros went to New York and he established an experimental workshop, that was the name, where people like Jackson Pollock participated. Jackson Pollock was one of the students of Siqueiros in this workshop. Well, that's one story. Then Orozco went also to different places, to Chicago, to Denver, I think. I don't remember well, but he also was commissioned to paint murals. I think mostly the left, the American left, were the ones that were calling or inviting these muralists, but not in the case of Rivera. Rivera was invited by rich people like Rockefeller to paint murals because he was very famous then. He was like Picasso. So it was like the Mexican Picasso, and the rich people in New York wanted to have Rivera with them. So this is another story also, how they, and well, then there are some people, some Siqueiros also went to the south, to Argentina, and painted some murals there. Some are forgotten. But this is another story, so we have to talk in another webinar of how the exportation of the muralist movement and how it influenced modern art. And this is interesting. There was, some months ago, there was an exhibition in the MoMA in New York about the influence of Mexican muralists in modern art. And this is also interesting because until very recently, muralism was looked like an exotic movement, no? Like, oh, you know, Latin Americans only do exotic things, no? Nothing important for the West hemisphere, no? So they didn't contribute anything to modern art in the West, in the Western script. No, MoMA shows us that they were very influential in many artists in the States. Jackson Pollock was one of them. The abstract expressionists as well. They took a lot, all the New York school, they took a lot of the expressionism of both Siqueiros and Orozco. So there's a whole story about that.
Hopefully we'll hear more about it sometime.
Another webinar, please.
So Linda King says, do we know how many people worked on the muralists' teams? How did it work? So Rivera sketched and did others paint, or what did it look like?
Yes, usually, yes, that was the way they worked. The master in charge of the mural made the drawing, the big sketch, decided how was everything going to be organized in the wall, and then the assistants helped him to pass it to the wall, and they start working. And of course, the master was always supervising everything and participating in giving the final touch, so you could see the same hand at the end. You could see the same style, the same hand. There's no diversity, although I think every mural needed about 4, 5, 6 people helping the master, and they were very long hours. They were working like 10 hours a day, like workers. They paid only for like 4 pesos of that time for a square meter. So they were working very hard. They were workers. They were really workers. That's why they called themselves cultural workers. They were not working as artists in their studios. They were really, really working harder, and every mural took many, many years working there. So it was a huge task, yes.
So speaking of the murals back in the Rockefeller one in New York, Carol Romano asks, I may be incorrect, but was it destroyed because it was too critical in its subject?
Yes. At the end, Rockefeller didn't like it and asked Rivera to take out, I think, the figure of the image of Marx, because Marx was also there. And Rivera didn't want it to change it. He didn't want it to touch the mural. So Rockefeller decided to remove the mural. And I don't know if it was destroyed or was just translated to some other place, but finally the mural was not exhibited where it was going to be exhibited.
I'm wondering, have you read the Barbara Kingsolver novel, The Lacuna? It talks about all of this. It's a fictionalized account of, it talks about, you know, him going to the Rockefeller and his relationship with Frida Kahlo. So if anybody's interested in this, it was a really interesting novel and I recommend it.
You have to understand that Frida Kahlo and Rivera were great publicists of themselves. They were like Hollywood actors. They know how to manage public relations and how to manage newspapers. So everything they did was in huge, no? And everything they did was a huge publicity for them. So even the removal of the mural in Eisenhower, in the Eisenhower building, in the Rockefeller building, was a huge publicity for them. They gained a lot of attention. You know, they were the artists rejected by the capitalists, no?
Sure.
But so that's the story. You have to understand who were every person, no? And for example, next session we're going to talk about Nahui Olin. You will understand who was Nahui Olin, how these people started to engage in all this movement and the personal motivations of each one and their personal limitations. This is a human history. Everyone has a limitation and everyone has a destiny, and it's interesting. It's a huge history of many people, talented people working around a same idea.
Excellent. We have one last question from Marilee Bayreuther. She asked, the mural at UNAM, is it three-dimensional? She said it looks carved.
Yes. Siqueiros was always experimenting with new techniques. He had the idea that the art in the 20th century had to use the same technique as industry, even though it was capitalist industry, but it was all this technology developed by the capitalist industry has to be developed, had to be introduced into art. So he was always experimenting with new type of paintings, with new tools. And one of his experiments was these three-dimensional murals he did in UNAM. He's very famous for doing that. He was like the first one in the world to do that, to make three-dimensional murals. And in this case, they are covered by mosaic, but they're very interesting because of that. Because was always experimenting different techniques, and he didn't stay in only one technique. He changed a lot around his life.
Well, we're, as I mentioned early in the first session, that we had planned with you a tour to go down to Mexico City and to have you as the guide for the murals and to see all of these pieces of work in person. So I hope that, you know, when things get back to normal, if they ever do, that we will be able to do that. And we hope that some of you participating today can join us on that. And, you know, stay tuned to our website. We'll have all the updates of that. We have some thank yous from, thank you from Ginger Romano, from Carol Romano, sorry, who says, thank you, Alberto, so much for your extraordinary knowledge of this history and your own experience as a student of art. And I think she speaks for everybody here today. It's been very, very informative. I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody else has as well.
And thank you all for coming. This has been a great series. Thank you, Alberto.
Thank you. Muchas gracias a todos. Let me speak a little bit in Spanish. Gracias a todos. Nos vemos en el siguiente tocando el tema de Nahui Olin. Muchas gracias.
Gracias,
Alberto.
Bye.